Welcome to today's Apex Office Hours session on exploring Oracle Forms Modernization. I realize that everyone is really busy, and so I just wanted to thank you for giving us an hour of your time today. As David mentioned earlier, other than the speakers, I ask that you remain muted with your video off just to conserve the bandwidth. But looking at the chat prior to this event starting, it's amazing to see people from Paraguay and Argentina and China and Czech Republic and Germany, and it's really just amazing. So thanks everyone for joining today, and I hope it's worth your time. My name is Joel Kallman. I manage the development and product management of Oracle Application Express, and I've been working with Oracle Apex since its genesis. It's interesting to note that the first large-scale Apex application that was ever created on the planet was an Oracle Forms application for a large U.S. metropolitan police department, and this was back in 2003, maybe, and it's still in production today and upgrading to the latest versions of Apex. I really wanted to thank Stephen Forrestein and his team of evangelists for providing this platform for us, this office hours. And if you go to asktom.oracle.com and you click the office hours link, you'll see many other topics related from the database division. And there are really just a variety of interactive sessions very much like this one. And I encourage you to check them out. So office hours, this forum is typically a short presentation and a demo followed by Q&A. But today's going to be a bit different. It's going to be primarily a panel discussion. I'll give a very brief intro to Apex. I'll keep it as brief as possible. And really, my goal today is for you to hear from these global experts who've joined us. And so what ultimately precipitated today's session? There's thousands of forms applications in the world, and we frequently hear from customers who are looking for a way to modernize these forms applications. And in our biased opinion, we think that Oracle Apex is the ideal platform for this type of modernization. So rather than you hear us bloviate about this, we want you to hear and learn from the people who have successfully done this, both good and bad. If there's one URL that you need to remember from today, it's this one, apex.oracle.com. We have a lot of information about Apex, including forms modernization, and you can also sign up for a free service on Apex, and 2,500 people do that every week. So let's get rolling. What's Apex? Apex is the low-code web application development framework of the Oracle database. It's a no-cost feature of the Oracle database. There's you can have any number of developers, applications, end users. It runs on every version of the Oracle database, 11GR2 and higher, and all editions from the forthcoming Express Edition, free version, 18C, all the way up to multi-node rack clusters. It runs in the Oracle Cloud, other clouds, doesn't matter. Wherever you have an Oracle database, you have Apex, and Apex is included with that database. You as a developer, without any knowledge of CSS or HTML, you can create beautiful looking applications that render perfectly on every device. Apex includes a large number of very rich, highly functional components, and you can use these easily in your application. All declarative, all essentially no code. And the UI of Apex is very customizable. So if you need to modify it to adhere to your corporate standard and someone does know CSS or HTML, then you can render virtually any user interface out of Apex. Why do a lot of customers use Apex today? One of the biggest ones that we see is they prefer to leverage their vast investment in SQL and PL SQL skills. And that really is the native language of Apex. If you know a little bit of PL SQL and you know SQL, you can capitalize on this in Apex. Also, why customers use Apex, it's included with the database at no additional cost. It's a feature of the Oracle database, very much like Oracle Text or SQL. It's browser-based, it's wizard-driven, it guides you through the development process, and it really lowers the barrier for people to begin building web applications. And we typically find when people come from an Oracle form, there's this leap from, let's say, client-server to web. And what people are bringing to the table is a lot of knowledge of SQL and PL SQL and business logic, and they can quickly capitalize on this in Apex. So lots of customers say Apex is stable, secure, it's scalable. This has been proven, and you'll hear about this today. And lastly, Apex is not a closed system. There's a very rich extensibility framework that's part of Apex, and the community itself contributes to what Apex can do. Speaking of the Apex community, which is something that we are most proud of, and let's just talk about this if we can. So what has our community done? There's a site out here, builtwithapex.com, and it's a showcase of Apex applications on the internet. Anyone can contribute, and there's you can come here and look at a huge variety of business problems being solved with Apex. Our wonderful community also created translateapex.com, a crowdsourced repository of translations for Apex. Apex ships with 9 translations out of the box. You go to translateapex.com. There are 40 translations at your disposal. Our wonderful community also created a portal for Apex, apex.world. And this is intended to be a one-stop shop for most everything related to Apex, from Twitter feeds, jobs, Slack channels, meetups, plugins, and more. Speaking of plugins, if you go to Apex World and you navigate to plugins, you'll see a wealth of open source plugins that our community has created and made available publicly. There are also even commercial offerings built in Apex. So there's a large collection of open source contributions, and there are many commercial offerings built on top of this framework. For example, FOEX it's a low-code plugin framework for Apex that further extends the capabilities and UI of Apex. And it's a great example of the extensibility of the Apex framework. There's Apex Office Print, which is a very elegant printing solution for Apex applications. There's Apex Sec, which is an automated security analysis tool for Apex. And there's many more. Not only are there many other commercial offerings for Apex, but there are many companies who have built their commercial application on Apex for sale. And lastly, wherever you go to conferences and meetups around the world, you'll see there is just incredible pride and enthusiasm within our community. We think one of the best in all of Oracle. And this enthusiasm is authentic. So I contacted a number of members of the Apex community who I've known for many years, and I know that they have a wealth of experience in modernizing Oracle Forms applications in Apex. And like I said earlier, we prefer that you hear from them and understand their experience and lessons learned in taking Forms applications and modernizing them with Apex across a variety of industries and geographies. And I would just like to introduce today's panel, if I could please, in alphabetical order. Firstly, we have Dario Bilic. He's a board member and manages this company, Bilog, which is headquartered out of Zagreb, Croatia. And Dario himself is a longtime Oracle Forms user, 3.5. And in general, they focus on insurance and banking sector. And Dario is also interesting because his company also has a commercial offering built on Apex. Secondly, we have Simon Greenwood. And Simon is a development services director for Explorer UK, which is, it seems consistently year after year, the database partner of the year in the UK. And Explorer and Simon have spent a lot of effort and time migrating and modernizing Forms applications to Apex. Next is Sergey Martins. Sergey is from the Netherlands in a company, Smart for Solutions. And he is also a longtime Oracle Forms customer since Forms 4.0. And he is going to convey some experiences they have in working with a Forms modernization project for a large oil and gas customer in the Netherlands. And lastly, we have Francis Mignot. Francis is an Oracle ACE director and works for InSum Solutions out of Montreal. Like everybody else on this panel, Francis is a longtime Oracle Forms customer, has written books on Apex, and has really been in the Apex game almost since we started. So I'm going to stop sharing here if I can. And we have a number of questions prepared for our panel, and I'm just going to begin. Also, as I mentioned earlier, if anybody has any additional questions, you can feel free to ask them in the chat, and David will be sure to interject here. Okay, so my first question for the panel here is if you could please give a brief overview of one of your completed projects or a project which is underway. If you could describe the industry, the purpose of the application, maybe the number of end users, how many forms comprise the application, and why did the customer choose to modernize, and why did they choose Apex? And so, Dario, if we could begin with you, please. Oh, but you have to unmute. Oh, wait, I think I can unmute you, Dario. Okay, you're unmuted.
Okay, perfect. I tried to, but it didn't work. Okay, let me start. Hello, everybody. Hello from Croatia, Europe. I will start with the project that we just finished. It's basically in financial industry, so it's one large regional bank spanning the Central European region. They had a Forms app comprised of about 500 forms and about 600 reports, Oracle reports, and they decided to migrate to Apex. So it all started with a pilot project where they tried to choose different technologies. They finally decided for Apex, and they now have a successfully running system with more than 1,000 daily users built with Apex. So based on this pilot, they decided that among technologies such as Java with Angular, or they tried also .NET. They even tried modernizing the forms with the Forms 12c, but at the end they decided for Apex, and it was really a success story.
Awesome. Thanks, Dario. Simon, I'll unmute you here. Would you care to answer that question as well? Just some experience about a completed project or something which might be underway?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. So, yeah, the industry I'm talking about is the energy sector, and this is an ISV, an independent software vendor. So basically, they manage smart meter assets and jobs. So a smart meter is something you may have in your house to manage your gas and electricity from the traditional old meter style. So end user wise, this application in its form state is used by 4 of the 6 largest energy suppliers in the UK. And basically they have hundreds of users, but each version of the application per supplier has significant customizations. The current version we're working on is about 100 plus forms, but in total it could be many hundred by the time we've finished all the modules. The reasons why the customer wanted to modernize and move away from forms, and really there's some very obvious ones. So the first one was, as an ISV, they needed a software as a service offering as a delivery model for the products going forward. They're in a very competitive market, so they need to stay competitive, and therefore they needed a browser-only deliverable. But they've had significant issues around Java support with the Forms application and the ongoing costs that are associated with that support. They wanted a responsive and modern design, because it wasn't just going to be desktops, it was going to be tablets as well that they're going to use it for. And basically they needed lower entry point costs for new customers. And lastly, really, was that there is no Oracle Forms cloud service, and they need a cloud option going forward. The other one is that they're branching out into Europe, so they needed to think about multi-language applications, and Apex is, like you said earlier, by default there's a number of languages, but from the community offering, there's also option to do even more languages. So it was a very good fit. And really, they could reuse everything they had because they were Forms people. And lastly, really, they with the skills they had as Forms people, it's probably the best prerequisite you can have to learning Apex, based on the fact that they can take their database knowledge and their PL SQL knowledge and apply that learning this new interface, which is Apex.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. Sergey, would you like to discuss any project either completed or underway? And I will unmute you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Joel. Hi, my name is Serge. Welcome from the Netherlands. Yes, I'm, the biggest forms modernization we're currently working on is a project for the oil and gas industry. It's actually a tank terminal company which stores all kind of energy products to those big tanks you many times see at big harbors. And they have kind of 14 terminals at the moment, but have a really big grow ambition. So what they wanted to do is to prepare their forms application to get it a little bit, to prepare it for the future, for their grow ambition. And they decided completely, not redesigned, but migrated to another technology, and at the same time do some refactoring to make it better fit the business needs. And at the start, they tried to do that with other technologies, for example, ADF. And after a while, they encountered Apex and saw that it could be even faster with Apex. And currently, we're now working on the project for I think half a year now, with 2 development teams, both consisting of 10 developers, 10 members in each team. So it's quite a large enterprise project, which is really important for the whole company, for the ongoing business in the future.
Awesome.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And last but not least, Francis, would you like to answer that question as well about a customer project either underway or completed? And you're unmuted now, Francis.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. So the one I've selected, because we did many conversions over the years, and the biggest one we did was for a major cruise line in the US. And what we did is worked on their shipboard property management system, which is core to the company. And this was actually a lot of projects put together across multiple years. It covered embarkation, shore excursion, guest services, back office, reporting also. And overall, I think we did more than 300 forms, modernized that, and then also a lot of reports. That's something that always comes with forms usually. It's Oracle reports. And the reason was because they were having some performance issues, and they needed to kind of modernize their UI, especially for the guest services and shore excursion. We did the complete redesign of their applications. And the advantages or the benefits they got from that was mainly leveraging what they had already. So moving to other technology would have been very expensive, but being able to leverage what they invested in over the years. We're talking about 15 different business functions and maybe 25, 30 different modules. So they migrated everything, but they wanted to leverage what they invested over the years.
Fantastic. Thanks, Francis. So I'm going to get to my next question here for our panel. And I would ask you, what would you say is your approach in modernization with Apex? Would you do a rewrite? Would you do a partial migration? Would you create new adjacent to the existing Oracle Forms apps? And I'm really curious what you found has worked well in the past. And let's begin with Simon, if we could, please.
Okay, so rewrite, partial, adjacent or coexist, they're all options and should all be considered. It really does depend on the circumstances, but I think from my experience, ultimately it is a rewrite by the time you're completely done, because coexisting, although you can transition to Apex, people also realize that by using Apex, they don't have the middleware license costs that they do as in form services, which can be quite a cost saving. The other approach is, the other way is that really that, the environment issues go away from the Java support. But I think once you start using Apex, you realize how productive and function rich it is, in terms of what it offers you. From my perspective, we've got, in terms of approach, Oracle Forms application can be converted to Apex. It can be made like for like. There are no technical limitations because it can be made to look exactly the same. However, there are a few things to consider. So take Oracle Forms as an example. At best, it is a client-server application rendered in applet to make it a web application. So a lot of client-server-based applications with legacy used to use a number of components that were possibly interacting with the client side. It may be local machine variables and so on. And you need to revise when you use Apex to make sure it works like a web application. So don't try and duplicate a client-server application. It's likely that the business has probably been limited by its use of forms. In other words, the business has got so used to it. So what I mean by that is that, Apex does provide new options, and it's probably an essential part of the business, but I see no limits. There's no reason why you can't move to Apex. Is it the right choice? Well, to date, Apex has always been a great choice as far as we're concerned. But I think there's some things to be very clear about, and there is no way to migrate from Forms to anything else, and I get asked this a lot, and the answer is no. So it is redevelopment. You can't get away from that. You've got to redevelop what you have, and there's no automated way to redevelop, but you can reuse everything you've got. So in summary, for me, there is no silver bullet to it, but Apex to Forms, for me, can quite simply be put as, you're recycling, you're retransforming, you're refactoring, replicating, and redesigning exactly what you've got. But as the old phrase sort of goes, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You've got a lot to use. You're just enhancing it in a new environment. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Simon.
Okay.
Sergey, could I ask you the same question? Like, what would you say is your approach in modernization with Apex?
Yes, thank you, Joel. Yeah, I agree with Simon. If I look at my last two forms conversions, we did it like kind of do a one-to-one migration as well. We started with it, and I think it's the most easiest way to get from a forms technology to an Apex technology. The hardest thing for doing that is convincing the business that they're not actually getting something. They're getting new technology, but from a business need, they're not really getting something. something. And that can be kind of hard to well, find budget to start such a project. What I did in the last Finnish Forms to Apex project is that we did a one-to-one migration, which means one forms is transformed to one or several Apex screens. We use almost everything what's in the database, what's Forms already using, and actually just pull out the client-side logic, which is kind of the logic which is built in Oracle Forms, and put that also in the Oracle database and build on top the Apex application. So that's kind of the one-to-one migration. But as you can, if you go with that, my experience is that the business is going to see Apex and they're going to be enthusiastic about it, and they are sure going to ask you to add more functionalities than were originally in the Forms application. And so what I really like for an approach to do is to kind of do a one-to-one migration, use as much code as possible that you have from the old form system, and actually only transform what's in the Oracle Forms client build itself, transform it to the database, and choose some low-hanging fruit, which makes the business really happy because they are getting a new application. And that's something, well, which really works for our last project. Sometimes it can be the case, though, that you are looking at a really old Forms application, which is really legacy, which is not really fitting for any purpose anymore, or not fit for the business, and that the changes are that high that a complete rebuild and redesign is needed. But that would be the last case to do. I would definitely first try to go with a one-to-one migration and do a low-hanging fruit picking on what kind of functionality can we add to the business, that they're not only getting a new technology, but they're also getting a kind of new system. And in the way of work I like to do is that you look at specific user groups and say, okay, this is a user group we can transform at once, which is a smaller group, and make the screens for them in Apex, so that at least that they don't have to work in the Oracle Forms and the Oracle Apex system at the same time. It's something I would well, try to avoid. And if you go from user group to user group to user group, it's actually, you can gradually transform your system from the Oracle Forms to the Apex technology.
Outstanding. Thank you, Sergey. And Francis as well, would you like to address this? What is your approach?
I would like just to maybe add something to that. So our approach is kind of the same as Sergey. We used to do full-fledged big bang approach where we tried to, convince clients to migrate all of their application in one shot, but that came out to be hard to justify at the business level. So now our approach is more of a partial rewrite or extending what they have. So we're trying to first get them to understand what Apex is, start using it, and the great thing about Apex is that you're already paying for it in your licensing, right? So you can start using it right away. So you don't necessarily have to integrate everything right away, but you can start building application on your existing data, on your existing Forms applications, and then get the users to start knowing what it is and how it works and how good it is and everything else. And then we start migrating other modules and stuff like that. So our approach is really by module and partially slowly moving forward. And sometimes it may be that they want to keep some of their Forms application because it works good and people are trained and whatnot. But there's definitely some things we can do better or faster or easier, and then get them to be more modern and pass on to the web side of things. So our approach is really by module or by partially migrating or adding things to their existing Forms.
Sure. Awesome. Thank you, Francis. Okay. I'm going to go on to my next question here. And I'll begin with Sergey. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges that you face in this type of project when you're going from either a partial or complete forms modernization effort to Apex. And I'm gonna unmute you. There you go.
Yes. Yeah, especially when you work for the first time or start work developing in Apex, it's kind of hard to get the mindset or the concept of web application development in a general. If you're having a forms history, you kind of used to put a whole lot of functionalities, put it all in one page, and the end user is happy because he sees everything, all the information at that specific page, and can do everything in that specific page. And that's just a really big difference from web applications, that you try to not look at a system. I call it from a feature in a feature way. So you're not looking in, okay, in this screen I can maintain my orders, I can maintain my invoices, but more in a way that you need to perform a specific task. I call it more in a flow way. So in that concept, there is a difference between screens which are developed in Forms and screens that are developed in Apex. Many times, one specific Forms will be resulting in multiple Apex screens, which a user is guided to complete his task. So getting that correct, that mindset is something you have to get to get in a really high productivity flow. If you work in bigger teams, in the beginning, it's sometimes kind of searching for, okay, what are our UI standards? Because you have the universal theme, and you can do so much with it. And you can do your button left and right, and your icon can left and right. And you have multiple developers who all have their own preferred way to do it. And keeping those developers all aligned can sometimes be a little bit challenging. And one also, I think, it's always a risk in project, but especially in Forms to Apex migrations, there can sometimes be a challenge in scope creep because, as I just mentioned, that you go from a Forms application to an Apex application, only want to add the low-hanging fruit. Sometimes it can be kind of challenging to keep the business away for having them asking all new kind of features, because if they see there's something new in Apex which could not in Forms, they want to have more. So they're going to react, oh, if I can do this, I would like to have that. And then you get kind of in a slowly way, see your project growing and growing and growing. So that's, for me, the biggest challenges in the project, to have the scope creep and have the new developers who are used to think in a Forms development way, have them work in an Apex development way.
In general, though, what you're describing isn't even really unique to Apex, right? There's always scope creep, and transitioning anyone from, I won't say Forms to Apex, traditionally client server to web, it's a little bit of a mindset. I don't care what underlying technology you use. There's a little bit of a bridge that you have to cross to get there.
Exactly. Yeah, it's definitely not an Apex specific challenge, but a project management and a technology challenge.
Understood. Yeah. Simon, would you like to address this as well? Like what would you say are some of the biggest challenges you typically face in these types of projects?
Yeah, sure. So bear in mind the fact that, I'll give you some examples where Forms and Apex are different and they are challenges. So, Apex is a web framework, and it does work differently in some ways to what Forms does. So I'll give you sort of three differences or three ways of things that happen differently. So in Forms, you've got a permanent connection to the database, where Apex doesn't. So the things like PL SQL tables, temporary tables, think of an alternative, and really Apex collections is a good example of that. In Forms, people have done multi-row edits for a very long time. They've got very much used to that technology, and now until 5.1 and the introduction of interactive grid, prior to that we were using interactive reports, clicking in a link to obtain a modal page to do the editing. So they really like the multi-row edits, and that's possible now with the interactive grid. Validation-wise, in forms, it was very much, at item, triggers and a block level. Whereas, an Apex screen very much works like a web page where you are validating a page submission. So it can be done the same, but, to gain what a web framework provides for you, there's certain elements where you do need to change, and those are, for me, are three obvious ones. I'll finish off on this question with an example. We had a customer who's quite insistent on actually replicating 100% of a particular form. And a good example, in Oracle Forms, you've got it's called the post command. So that was a real challenge, and a challenge which I wouldn't recommend trying to do again, because trying to trick Apex into the behavior of way a forms would work, the post command, to validate data in various parts of an application where you can traverse across many pages is not a way a web page works. So on some occasions, it is redesigned. Sometimes the challenges aren't worth the effort, and I think that's an example of that.
Awesome. Thank you, Simon. I want to move on here. In this type of modernization effort, what would you say were some of the biggest benefits to the customer, and was the customer ultimately satisfied with the result? And Dario, would you care to respond, please?
Sure. Well, let's first talk about the cost side. So basically, compared to Oracle Forms, Apex is a low cost option, or even a no cost option to the client. So basically, he's already paying for the Oracle licenses, and there are no additional tiers which incur some extra costs. So basically, once you move away from the Forms environment, you actually gain some additional resources where you can invest in some other ways. So this is the number one reason from the management perspective, let's say, that you're lowering the costs. The other very important thing is basically reusing your development teams. So basically you have these development teams, especially in the large companies, so where there are multiple teams of let's say 50 or 100 people who work with Oracle Forms and Oracle reports. And now you have two options, basically educating them in some other technology completely. So moving away from Oracle and moving to any other technology, which is a valid choice. But also you can leverage the investment in PL SQL and also in some other things, and basically reuse those development teams, either partially or in general. So you're really also from the cost perspective gaining a lot. PL SQL is the base language of Apex. Obviously, you have to educate those people to some web standards as well. But this is also benefit. So basically, you get the upgraded, let's say, developers, and Forms developers are usually maybe even a bit older. So they're not young people who start working with something, but for a very short period of time, they can gain a lot of knowledge about the web technologies because they don't have to learn it from the bottom up. They already know 2/3 of everything they have to know. So that's great. I would also say one of the benefits is you instantly get the pure web technology. If you imagine the Oracle Forms where you had to manage all these installations, and then you try to you have like 2,000 clients, and you have to manage Java on each and every client, or you have to put some terminal servers somewhere in order to somehow centralize these deployments. With Apex, it's centralized, so it's basically one-stop shop. You got everything there. You just need the web browser, and you got this modern look and feel. And at the end, if you use Universal Team, for example, you get the mobile as well. So you get the mobile applications instantly, which is great. And then you have this Oracle REST data services, which is actually free. On top of it, you have the REST services. Boom. So it's actually quite easy to use this. And I would say the acceptance once the customer decides and has a first successful project is great. From the management perspective, they lower the cost. From the business user perspective, they have the modernized apps. They have really nice and shiny GUI. And from the developers, they learn something new, which is great. And they are in the new technology. So I think it's actually multiple benefits there.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Dario. And I tell you, I love your enthusiasm too. You're all in. Francis, would you like to address this as well? What would you say has been the biggest benefit to the customer, or have they been satisfied with the result?
Yes, so I 100% agree with what Dario says. So, of course, I think the biggest benefit is to leverage the existing investment you've done in Oracle. So, licensing what you've built over the years, the data model you invested in and built, and especially with forms, you probably have a big data model that is working, and you have everything in there. Easy interfacing with other systems using REST services, using the same technology stack, saving on licensing. So cost-wise, it's very big benefit for the existing forms users, and the infrastructure also. And like Dario said, the whole team, you can keep the exact same team, the exact same technical stack, infrastructure and everything, and start using it. So it's easier to train someone that did forms to Apex than forms to .NET, Java, or whatever else, right? So being more modern, have nice UIs, doing mobile and all those things. So you kind of jump to the 21st century and then start doing, nice new things and start doing things that, are good for your users and easy to use. So yes, I'm exactly in line with what Dario said.
Awesome. Thanks, Francis. Hey, stay unmuted there because I got another follow-up question for you, if you don't mind. So we always talk about a compelling reason to move from Forms to Apex is you get to preserve a lot of your investment in the back-end SQL and PL SQL. So my question to you is this really all a fallacy? Are we lying or are we telling the truth? And in general, how much of the back-end code, the business logic, would you say had to be modified to work in this new world of Apex?
So if you've built your forms and put your code in a database using packages, and you've worked on your data model, like I mentioned before, a good data model, and you leverage the database as much as you could, then you can probably reuse most, or if not all, that you did before, and use that within Apex and just change the UI. Where it gets a bit more complicated is when you have specific things that were built in the forms, or you've used the designer, for example, to generate everything with a lot of code, and it's a bit more work to go through every forms and extract all of this. But the good thing is there are tools out there, and then working with the XML version of your forms, you're able to extract a lot of logic there, and even there's a tool in Apex that you can use, the Apex forms conversion tool, where you can upload your XML forms in an XML form, and then you can tag whatever you want to migrate or not, or change or copy. But I would say, yes, it's true. You can reuse everything, and one of the reasons why is also that Apex is close to forms as a development approach. So a form is based on a data model, and it's like a relational development. So you base a block on the table and those type of things. Well, Apex is pretty similar. It's not object oriented or different, another type of approach. You have the same kind of development approach with Apex than what you have with forms. So it makes it even more easier to reuse what you add or what you have in forms and use that in Apex also. So yeah, my point of view on this is that yes, you can reuse pretty much everything, but be careful with what you have inside of the forms. That's a bit more work.
Sure, agreed. Thanks, Francis. And I'll ask you the same question as well, Dario. I know you've worked with a very large insurance company with a lot of business logic and back-end PL SQL and migration. How much would you say were you able to even reuse?
Yeah, the Francis stole all my arguments. But basically, I'll be quite frank here. Doing a lot of forms conversion projects, usually there is not a lot of code in the database. So forms developers, at least from my experience, tend to put a lot of code on forms. So basically, this is the bigger issue because you have to move all these business logics to the database and to basically rewrite it because it's hard to find where everything fits. So it's a kind of remodeling as well. So, but basically, if you have the good data model, as mentioned before, and if you, by any chance, and you are lucky to have your code in the database, you will be faster, you will be better, and it will be easier to work with the team because they're already used to put everything in the database, which is a good practice. Also with Apex, you can put code on Apex pages, but you want to put them in the database because it's easier to maintain. And if you happen to have the code there, so you just have to see what's in for example, in the packages, so that there might be some temporary tables. You might rely on some user session variables, or there are some, I don't know, stateful connections which handle users differently in Apex, but these are to be addressed. So I would say, experience-wise, there is not a lot of code there. But in general, if there is some code, it's quite easy to read.
Okay, fascinating. Thanks, Dario. So I'm going to begin here this next question with Simon, and I wanted to understand the process that you follow to assess if something is appropriate to be modernized to Apex, and if you could even give an example of something that you wouldn't move to Apex from Forms.
Okay, so I've yet to come across a Forms application that wouldn't work well in Apex, but so bear in mind again, it's this web framework. Certain things, and I've seen Sunny Patel's comment on there about WebUtil. For all the benefits you gain from going to a browser, trying to accommodate something like WebUtil is security reasons is not a good thing. So really, I certainly wouldn't turn away work like that, but I would certainly not recommend doing it or trying to mimic that sort of functionality. But in terms of how we go about assessing whether it's the right thing to do, what we've done, we've built our own sort of, and a few people have done this out there, built our own tool for assessing how long it would take to do this. Now, the key thing for me is a Forms application will be legacy code. There will be numerous developers over a number of years who've had a go at that code, so it's going to be a real patchwork quilt. So if you've got the code, I think like Dario mentioned, get it in the database, so it's more reusable there. But like we built a tool where we can take FNBs on batch, turn them into XML, and we built an Apex application. We call it our Forms Inspector to analyze that XML, out the number of triggers, do an inventory on the number of blocks, the PL SQL and so on. So you can quickly assess, a low and a high value in terms of what the effort is, because that will determine whether it is appropriate or not, because it is appropriate. It's just you need to define how long it is. I think the key thing for me is, before you start the exercise to assess whether your Forms application is suitable, is take a good look at what's still used. I've worked on many applications before where the application has been so large, the Forms application, there's been elements of it that has actually just never been used for many years. But when it comes to redevelopment, they look at the whole picture. So really, there's an exercise before you look at Apex to determine what is left and what is still used. Well, that will give you a more true indication of what the effort is to transition, whether that's partially, in full, or whatever suits the business. So yeah, everything will move to Apex. That is Forms. Certain things should be done differently to embrace web technology.
Thanks, Simon. And sorry, Dario, if Simon stole all your thunder here as well. Would you have anything to follow up with this about how you go about assessing if something is appropriate to be modernized, and maybe something you wouldn't do?
Well, Simon took pretty much everything, but basically, one thing to be aware of, Apex is a web app. It's not a client-server app. So basically, coming down to technology, you work with a web technology, which obviously has some limitations. You work in a browser, browsers get modernized. There is this HTML5, there are extensions. Browsers now can talk to different devices and so on and so on. So it's getting better and better. And in Forms, you obviously had more control with the client side. So you could deal with files, you could copy files, and with web, because of the security, it's not possible. So you have to either have some plugins, you have to install something on the client, which is not really a web-based thing to do. But on the other hand side, we've integrated on our projects with many different things, such as, for example, the smart cards, where you plug your smart card in and you can access your bank account and so on. And it works perfectly in Apex. So, the approach to modernization, you have to be aware Apex is a web app. Like any other web app, it has no limitations there. So what any other web app can do, Apex can do. And with Forms, you're limited, but you had some more client-side, let's say, possibilities, So just do it differently and it will work perfectly.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Dario. Speaking of web here, and I'll address this next question to Sergey. How do you go about educating someone to use Apex, especially who comes from a Forms background? Because I'm looking at a lot of the chat here, and there's lots of comments of, it's easier to take someone from nothing to Apex than Forms to Apex. So Apex is web, and web is different. And how do you even go about approaching the education of someone who's coming from a Forms background? And I will unmute you. Sorry, there you go.
Thank you, Joel. In the current project, we did a training and a company training to the Forms developers, and it was kind of staged in 3 stages. First, we did kind of a beginner's training on Apex, and in that part, we really got into where the buttons are in Apex. Do your first really simple forms, and after that, people got 1 or 2 days to play in their own playground, just to invest on what they wanted to invest in. And then we did a second training, which was also 3 days, in which we did a kind of an advanced or intermediate Apex training. And there, the real concept of which I think is really important in Apex, about the rendering stage, the client stage, and the processing stage. In my opinion, I think that's way much more important when you start with Apex than knowing how the internet protocol works or how web development works. If you really want to understand how Apex works, it's the concept of rendering a client side and processing is really important. And after that knowledge, it's people can go fly out and do their stuff, especially when they are Forms developers, because they are so familiar with SQL and PL SQL. And to be really honest, 80% of my work is still SQL and PL SQL. And that's the third part that we do in the IMP company. We try to talk about best practices, because as in every development framework or development tool, you are always able to create a mess. Also in Apex. So especially when you want to migrate or modernize bigger systems, leveraging the best practices is, I think, a really good thing to do. So those are the 3 main concepts in our training. And only at the real end of the training, when people are kind of beginning to get used with Apex and do their first forms, then we talk about web technologies like JavaScript, CSS. And that's something I would recommend, that if you start modernization of your forms, that you at least have somebody who is kind of experienced with web development joining your team, that if the Apex framework is not providing a specific functionality, you at least have somebody who can help you on, this needs a really small JavaScript function, or this needs some tweaking in the CSS, etc. Because I think that's the part you want to stay away from in the beginning when working with Apex.
Sergey, thanks. Dario, would you like to address this as well, about how you go about taking someone from a Forms background and educating them in Apex and web?
Sure. I'd like to add to what Sergey said. It's really good to have somebody on the board who knows web technologies. So it just helps out. It doesn't mean you have to work a lot in web technology, but it just helps out. It's easier to grasp all these new web things for the developers. Basically, what we do in educating our clients is offering targeted hands-on workshops. So basically, from the day one, they open Apex and start working in it. So we don't advise them to go to some other ways of learning, but just hit it. Forms, PL SQL, page 1 will be out there in 5 minutes, maybe even 2, depending who's using. So that's great. The other thing I would just like to add up is basically there are a lot of resources out there, which if you come from the forms background, you basically are not really aware of the forums. You're not aware maybe of the conferences. You're not aware of some other things. There is not something like the plugin exchange or whatever. So basically, we like to point, our clients, you can use this, you can use this, you can ask a question there. You can go on Twitter and ask a question there, and you'll get an answer like blazingly fast. And from coming from the forms mindset, you don't do this. You can ask your team member, and that's it. So it's really, really good community which helps out, and educating developers to use all those resources is basically great. Just go on Google and write something and you get an answer. And I would like to say, what also helps out really, is having like a number of components ready, which you can already reuse. For example, coming from the banking background, you want to have a standardized way of picking your client and so on and so on. So, build a plugin or let somebody build the plugin for you, and you easily leverage the rest of the things, just as an example. Or use some already, you mentioned FOIX before, it's a great framework as well. So coming from a form background, you could, for example, use FOIX as a framework, put it on top of Apex, and you get also additional features. There are a lot of easy to use components. There is probably less JavaScript, there is a UI which, let's say, looks more like forms. So this is also a way to do it, especially for the back office people. Coming from a forms background, you have an accountant with a big form that she or he just enters data, and you have to do it in Apex. When you're in web technology, it's not that easy, You do have this interactive grid and so on, but at the end, you have to enable them to do their work fast because it's their business. Am I off the subject here, or?
No, you are. And actually, though, you're giving a great example because don't think that we in general say that you should move everything from forms to Apex, because for back office, heavy duty data entry applications, you can't beat forms. You can't. It's tried and replicated in web. FOIX can assist with this, but it's difficult. So thanks for raising that point.
Yeah, just to add one more thing, usually with the big clients, it's a hybrid approach. You don't move everything to Apex right away. You integrate forms with Apex and work with this, because this gives you a way to do it stepwise.
Thanks, Dario. And I want to extend this to Francis as well. I just want to do a time check here. It's 7:58 California time here. I don't know if you gentlemen are able to hang around for a little bit. I'd like to complete this. If you have to go, I fully respect your time. So Francis, I'll extend this question to you as well, about how you go about educating someone to use Apex, especially coming from a forms background.
So I think this is, if you want to have a successful migration from forms to Apex, I think this is key to everything. To me, all of those migration or modernization of forms to Apex, the problem is always getting people on board, understanding how web works, and having this mind change. So to me, this is very important. It's more important even than the technology. We can do everything with Apex. It works as long as you don't try to reproduce one-to-one or exactly the same thing that client server is doing, and the others I've mentioned different examples or challenges there. But we saw that over time we're able to reproduce all the business functions, right? But our approach is really training the developers, getting them to use Apex, getting them to play with it, build some application, understand what the web approach is. Also, we like to partner up with them, so show them, do's and don'ts based on our experience, different approaches. Like Dario mentioned, the community, there's a lot of information there, the blogs, try it on apex.oracle.com for free. We like to share our experience and bring people to, what Apex is, and help them out, especially in the things that are very much more complicated. We also built a methodology and an approach and different processes, and get them to learn about the different tools, how to work with Apex, use all the different tools that are available for you to debug or to trace or to develop a good application. So there's a lot of training on the dev side, but also I think there's also a lot of training to be done on the user side, because we saw also the change management for users trying to adopt a new technology is always hard, and they need to understand that they'll be doing things differently. Like you said, maybe doing some entries with the keyboard will be different than in Apex, and having a different approach. So we also built some training for the users and get them really early in the development stage, using an agile approach, give them things that they can play with, look at, and then start, accepting or getting into the new web approach. So our approach is really on those two sides. It's not only dev, but it's also to buy in and understand that at the end, it's going to be a lot better for them.
Sure. Thanks, Francis. This kind of leads us into our next question, and maybe this was already addressed, and I'll begin with Dario here. There's no hard and fast rule of how long does it take someone coming from Forms to even become competent in Apex, but in general, how long would you say this takes for them to become relatively productive in Apex and web development? And in general, have you found that they were able to carry on Apex development on their own?
It's actually 42 minutes, Joel. So they need 42 minutes. No, I'll try to be serious. Actually, it's actually, for the Forms developers who work in Forms for a longer time, it's a matter of, I would say, weeks when they become productive. So they have to get some training at the beginning for sure. Then they can be really quite productive in a matter of weeks. But at the end, I think, being productive can mean a lot of stuff, but it's good to have some Apex consulting on site or somebody to help you out. So if you have a 10 member team, it's good to have somebody on the side. You can start working in weeks, become productive, but to help you out with the basic stuff. And then I would say after, it's hard to say roughly, but a month or two, this team can be productive by its own. So they don't need any external support, and they can really develop end user apps with their knowledge.
I like the 42-minute answer better.
Yeah.
Thanks,
I know.
Yeah, thanks.
I try to be short.
Simon, could you give your feedback on that as well, about how long you find in general it takes someone to become productive?
Yeah, well, I would say, up and running within a few days, and certainly reasonably competent in a few weeks. But, certain technologies like JavaScript, jQuery, and so on, are skills that take longer and could be, quite a few months. But, I think the key thing for me is that any Forms developer, even with the first contact of Apex, will develop something and swiftly build on that initial contact to then start building, great looking applications and functional applications very quickly. So, the only thing I would say is that, to finish off on that, is that, the correct mindset is to embrace the way Apex approaches the issue, rather than someone trying to hold on to the way Forms would actually do something. But that just comes through familiarity. So, I agree with Dario's point, and, you will quickly build something, and you will build on that knowledge and quickly produce stuff of production quality.
Thank you, Simon. So next question here is to Francis, and the question's really, are customers able to do this migration on their own, right? If I were a casual office hours, I might think, wow, I need professional help to do this. So would I be able to get this done on my own? Need assistance from someone?
It's like anything else, right? So I think clients that knows a bit of Apex can start on their own and try and start working. Of course, it's always better to have outside help or a coach or a partner that will come in with either their tooling or their approach or do's and don'ts or challenges that they met before, and maybe some plugins, maybe some different things that they've built. For example, in our case, we did build some processes, and then we do have some tooling that we can use to help out. We also do have some training where we can tell you, with a forms conversion, you're better off with this approach than trying to do this one-on-one, exactly same thing conversion. And here's the reasons why. So the answer is, I think, yes, people can start doing it on their own, but it will probably be a bit longer or a bit more expensive, or they'll probably try different things before they get on the right path. So for us, it's really have a good approach. Start up with not necessarily the biggest forms, but try that one with start with one that is the most representative of everything. Put in place and plan upfront your security, authorization, and plan before. So there's different things and different steps that we've learned along the way with all of those different migration projects that we can share. So I think there's a gain in productivity and costs by partnering up with someone. But yeah, I think people, if they want to try out and they have a small form, maybe 2-3 forms, and they want to rewrite something, that's also a good start to start learning and seeing what it's all about.
Thanks, Francis. I'd like to ask you, Sergey, the same type of question, and that is, can a customer who has a large portfolio of forms applications attempt to do this on their own? Do they need outside help? Will they fail if they have no Apex experience? What's your opinion?
Well, I totally agree with Francis. I think if it's a smaller application, well, probably after training, the developers can do it perfectly on their own. If you're going to work on larger systems, I highly would recommend to have somebody assisting you on, especially using the best practices. How to do your deployment? How to do your version control? How to set up the environments, and maybe even have them building some plugins, because the old forms application does have some requirements in it which need to be in the Apex framework, which are not currently in. And one of the things that Apex can provide is that you build your plugin and make something part of the Apex application framework, and use that as a component, as it were, from Apex itself. So to summarize that, well, for smaller systems, definitely. For larger system, I would definitely recommend to have them to get some assistance for the first few months at least.
Yeah, thanks, Sergey. And like Francis said, really that's applicable to any technology, right? If you're moving from forms to Rust, you need somebody who's competent in that. So, okay, 8 minutes past. I'm on the last question here. And since Dario had all of his thunder stolen before, we'll begin with Dario here. For anyone who's watching this, right, who's contemplating modernization from forms to Apex, would you have any specific advice for them?
Yeah, we heard a lot of arguments here. I would say, try to be short. Just do it. Go pick Apex and just do it. Based on the number of cases, the business user love it, the management loves it, the developers really love it. So you have a case there. Go visit, for example, the Oracle Tech Conference or Development Conference, and you will find the Apex blooming there. So it's great. You see within Oracle that Apex is really, really well accepted, and just do it.
Awesome advice. Nike might complain that you stole their phrase, but thanks, Dario. I appreciate it. Simon, would you have any specific advice for people? Anybody watching this?
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, have a look at the latest version of Apex. Sign up to apex.com. I think if you see that, you'll realize it's got a lot of great features. Experienced Forms developers will pick up Apex quickly, and most specifically from version 5 onwards when the page designer was introduced. Review exactly what you've got. Is it still used? Is it still relevant before you start thinking about that development? Just remember, it is redevelopment, whether it's partial, full, or whatever, or coexisting. But there is no silver bullet to redevelopment. It is work and it's redesign, but that brings more opportunity. The last thing I would say is that, with regards Oracle Forms and the future of Forms, just review your estate, review the longevity of that estate, review what the business needs. There's a really good Oracle paper, Oracle white paper. It was Java Client Roadmap update in March this year. That makes very specific statements about Oracle's direction with Java Web Start, which is the way forward really for people who are staying with Forms. And I think I would recommend anybody read that who's actually trying to make that decision point of whether they move away from Forms, because I think that is quite a statement in there. So I recommend that. And lastly, if I can just do a plug, Joel, we've got the Apex SIG, October the 9th, in London City office. There are still places. So anybody out there, we'd love to see you come along. Thank you.
So what date is that?
The 9th of October,
9th of
London City, Oracle City.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Simon.
Yeah.
Sergey, would you have any last advice or recommendations for people who are watching this?
I think I already mentioned it, and well, maybe it's also not Apex specific, but try to start small. Pick a small project, do a small thing which results in a quick, which has a quick result, so you can show to your business value in a really short time. And I would also recommend to especially have a look at the reporting functionalities from Apex. I think maybe it's not as far out that it's really specific something for Forms, but if you're working with Forms, most likely you'll also have reports. And if you have a look at the reporting functionality of Apex, it's really, really easy to understand and to produce, and a way much more functionalities that reports has. So we'll have a really enthusiastic end users quite easily. So that's something I would definitely advise to start looking at.
Excellent. Thank you, Sergey. And Francis, any final comments or tips or advice for anybody who's watching this?
Yeah, so first, start using Apex right away. You have Oracle Forms, you have Oracle Apex already, so install it, try it out, play with it, plan. So plan your UI, plan your security. Are you going to do your authorization, authentication? Plan, are you going to navigate or pop-ups or using interactive grid? Plan on which modules, or go by phases. Don't try to do everything at once. I think the keep it simple rule is a good thing with Apex always. So minimize bells and whistles, keep it simple. Avoid to recreate exactly the same thing as you have in Forms. Keep in mind that it's a web technology, so this is a big one. Change management, make sure you get your users and your developers and your analysts and your DBAs and all the team in line, get them trained, get them to know what web development is, what Apex is. And last but not least, get involved in the community. There's a lot of conferences, blogs, webinars, tons of things. There's a lot of the wealth of information out there. So be involved, get involved, learn, and there's a lot of things for you to just to go at. And that's it for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Francis.
Thanks.
And David, before we wrap up, are there any, I see there's a flurry of questions and a flurry of answers. Are there any that you would want to present to our panel here?
No, I think the majority of them have already been answered or by the the panel or directly on the chat. And we're already 15 minutes over time, so I think it's time to do a wrap.
Okay, so thanks to everyone for participating today, giving us an hour and 15 minutes of your time. This recording will be made available. There will be another Apex office hours in 2 weeks' time. And I specifically wanted to thank Francis, Simon, and Sergey for really sharing their time and their experience with everyone here. Thanks again for attending, and I wish everyone a great day. Bye.